One of the questions that I have received over the years from students is, how do we explain implicit memory to parents? And I think it's a really important question because as clinicians, we understand and we study the technical side of that. So we study the difference between implicit and explicit and what age does implicit memory turn to explicit memory, et cetera, et cetera. But that can be a lot if we're trying to have a conversation with a parent. So let's explore a little bit about, first of all, why we would even have this conversation. And if we were to have this conversation, how would we talk to a parent about implicit memory and what it means? So just as a reminder, implicit memory really means body-based memory. And explicit memory is the memory that when we say, hey, I want you to think about a time when you were eating ice cream, that in that moment, you're likely going to come up with something that either looks like a movie in your head or looks like a photograph. But there's a sense of, oh, there was that time on that beach a couple summers ago with my friends. So there's that sense of time around it. The implicit experience doesn't have that. The implicit experience is really body-based memory. It shows up in patterns in the body, so the way the body holds. It shows up in different templates, and when I say templates, like how we move and move through the world, how we engage with people. It's how it's stored somatically in our system. So, why would we even talk about this with parents? Well, let's say there's been an early trauma experience, and let's say that you're deciding as a clinician that this is an important conversation for the parents or caregivers to understand the potential impact of whatever the child went through. Or maybe you're trying to link a behavior now that's happening at age 6 with likely something that happened maybe when they were 1, and you're trying to explain this, and maybe you're talking to parents that have this idea that, well, but children don't remember before the age of 3, which, by the way, is still a commonly held belief in the world. There's still a lot of misunderstanding about what memory actually is. Or maybe the child had, in addition to an early trauma, maybe there were other circumstances. Maybe the child was adopted. Maybe there was a death. And yes, we can put those under the category of early childhood trauma. And maybe there were just circumstances, or maybe there was a medical intervention that happened. And we know that a lot of parents don't necessarily put medical under the umbrella of trauma, but maybe there was a medical intervention that happened early on. And yes, the child does remember. So, for whatever reason, you have come to this idea that it'd be important to explain this to parents. My suggestion to you is to really explain it quite simply, that we have two kinds of memory. We have memory that is stored in the body, and that we also have memory that is stored in the way that we tend to think of memory. You might even give them that example that I just gave you. So if I were to ask you to think of a time when you had ice cream, or think of a time when whatever it is, you took a walk outside somewhere and it was a really enjoyable experience for you. And you can explain to parents that that type of memory really comes online around the age of 3. But before that, it doesn't mean that the child doesn't remember. They can't locate the time, they can't locate the event, but the body remembers. And one of the phrases that I love to use with parents is, your child remembers because your child was there. They were there. They had the experience. The experience went into the body. The body remembers the experience, even though cognitively your child may not remember the experience. I think that's a really gentle way of explaining it. Sometimes I will also have that conversation with parents, if need be, to help them understand that that doesn't just start at birth. That's also goes into the in utero process as well, because sometimes That's useful in whatever the discussion is. So again, you'll have to know if that makes sense or not for the discussion you're having with parents. I think the next part of this to really support parents around is that there can be a lot of guilt and a lot of shame that comes up for parents when all of a sudden they realize, oh my goodness, this thing happened to my child, or this experience that my child went through, wow, really did impact them. And I think it's really important as we're having these conversations about the early years, whatever they may be, that we're really gentle with parents and caregivers, and that we really check our own bias and our own projections that we're having about the parents and if we're judging them, because they're going to feel this. If we're talking about creating a space of understanding and creating a place of healing, it's important that we're educating and we're regulating them while we're educating them. And we're also offering an opportunity for healing to happen. And we need to really check again our beliefs about maybe what happened to see if maybe that could be impacting part of the conversation. But when we're talking about implicit versus explicit with parents, keep it simple, keep it relevant to whatever it is that you are needing to have the discussion about. You don't need to get all neuroscience and technical and pull out charts of brains and whatnot. Just keep it simple. There's two kinds of memory. One before the age of 3, you could also add in and continues, but before the age of 3, and the other different kind of memory that happens after the age of 3, and it's the memory as we tend to know it. So take that information and use that in whatever relevant way makes sense to the conversation that you're having with parents. And I'm going to extend that out to any time you're having a conversation with parents about anything challenging. Keep it simple, keep it relevant, link it to what's important to them. Remember to regulate yourself, remember to regulate them. Likely this is challenging information for them to integrate. Remember that we're there for them to also borrow our nervous system. It's not just the child in therapy that needs healing, but if you're having these conversations, I guarantee that the parents and the caregivers need some healing too.